We all think we know the standard story of the American Civil War, right? The Union fights to preserve the nation, and Lincoln frees the slaves. But what if that story is missing the single most important part? What if the enslaved people of the South were the ones who actually won their own freedom? Well, that's the powerful and often forgotten argument from the great historian W.E.B. Du Bois. And this quote is just brilliant. It's a total paradox. How could the man who fired the first shot for the Confederacy accidentally kick off the very thing that would destroy it? Well, to figure that out, Du Bois tells us we have to stop looking at the war as just a fight between two white armies and start paying attention to the 4 million people they both decided to ignore. You see, Du Bois's whole argument starts with a really simple fact. At the beginning of the war, both the North and the South were completely deluded. They had this massive shared misunderstanding about what the fight was really about, and more importantly, who was actually a part of it. Let's be clear. For the Union, this was not a war to end slavery. Not at first. President Lincoln, his generals, the soldiers on the ground, they were all on the same page. Their one and only goal was saving the Union. Abolition, that was still seen as a radical, pretty unpopular idea that most of the North just wasn't behind. And this wasn't some hidden feeling. Just listen to this popular song lyric from the time. It really shows you how deep that sentiment went. In the minds of so many Northerners, the cause of the war and the cause of emancipation were two totally separate things. They were fighting for a flag, for a nation, not for the freedom of Black people. And this is where you see the massive, shared blind spot. Look at this. Both the North and the South built their entire war strategies on the exact same mistake. They assumed that 4 million enslaved people were just going to be passive background characters. The North figured they were too docile to ever help, and the South was counting on them being too loyal to ever leave. And boy, were they both about to find out how wrong they were. So if both sides were ignoring the enslaved population, what were the enslaved people actually doing? This is where Du Bois' theory totally changes the game and brings a new, powerful force to the center of the story. Nearly 4 million. Let that sink in for a second. This wasn't just some political issue or an abstract economic system. This was a nation of people living right inside the Confederacy's borders, an overlooked, underestimated, and, as it turns out, an absolutely decisive population. And this is Du Bois' core concept, the General Strike. Now, when you hear strike, you're probably picturing picket signs and organized meetings, right? But this was something different. It was leaderless. It was spontaneous. It was this massive collective action. The moment the Union Army got close enough, enslaved people made a simple but profound choice. They just walked off the plantations and headed straight for the army camps. They took their labor away from the Confederacy and offered it to the Union. And this wasn't some rash, panicked move. No, Du Bois describes it as a very deliberate, very calculated strategy. They waited. They watched to see if the Union Army was for real, if it was actually an army of liberation. And when that moment came, when it became obvious the Union either couldn't or wouldn't send them back, that's when they moved. Okay, so how did this strike actually work on the ground? Well, it started out as just a trickle of people, but it very quickly became a tidal wave that the Union Army had absolutely no idea how to handle. This quote just captures the incredible scale of it. It was like entire cities on the move. Wherever the Union armies went, enslaved people just appeared. We're not talking about a few dozen people here and there. We're talking thousands upon thousands, men, women, children, showing up at army lines, creating an instant and a massive crisis for Union commanders, both logistically and politically. And this set off a kind of chain reaction. At first, Union commanders were following the official rules and trying to send people back. But it was just impossible. There were too many. The actions of the enslaved people themselves literally forced the policy to change. And it all came to a head when General Butler, who desperately needed laborers, made a really practical call. He declared them contraband of war, basically, enemy property that he could seize. And the speed of this was just staggering. What started with 3 men walking into General Butler's camp just exploded. Within 2 months, nearly 1,000 people were there seeking refuge. Fortress Monroe became this beacon, and the news just spread like wildfire through what Du Bois called a mysterious spiritual telegraph among the enslaved. The word was out. Freedom was possible. So this brings us to the biggest question of all. How did this massive movement of people actually change the outcome of the entire war? Well, the strategic impact was, to put it mildly, immense.
You really have to see the General Strike as this brilliant two-sided strategic move. It crippled the Confederacy while it strengthened the Union at the exact same time. The South's whole economy, its whole military machine, was built on the backs of enslaved people. When that labor literally walked away, the entire foundation just started to crumble. And at the same time, that very same labor was transferred over to the Union, which got desperately needed workers, spies who knew the local terrain, and eventually a whole new source of soldiers.
And that's not a small number. Eventually, 200,000 black men, many of them the very same people who had walked off those plantations, officially signed up to fight for the Union Army. They filled the North's depleted ranks with some of the most motivated soldiers you can imagine, fighting for their own liberation. Even Abraham Lincoln himself would later say that without them, the North could not have won the war. And look at this timeline. It shows you that the official government policy was always playing catch-up. The enslaved people acted first. Their mass strike created a new reality on the ground, a reality that the U.S. government was forced to acknowledge, one reluctant step at a time, until finally you get the Emancipation Proclamation. You see? It wasn't a gift handed down from the top. It was a reality forged from the bottom up. So, what does this all mean? Where does this leave us? Well, it means we really have to rethink the entire story we tell ourselves about the Civil War, and especially about emancipation. This right here is the final, powerful summary from Du Bois: the withdrawal of labor that crippled the Confederacy and the bestowal of that same labor that strengthened the Union. By their own collective choice, by their own mass action, enslaved people forced a war for union to become a war for freedom. They became the main characters in the story of their own liberation. And so this is the question Du Bois leaves us with. And when you look at it through his eyes, the answer becomes pretty clear. Freedom wasn't just granted by a benevolent president or won by a righteous North. It was seized. It was taken through a massive, courageous, and absolutely decisive strike by 4 million people who simply chose to be free.